Ego will either build the life you want or quietly destroy everything you've worked for. Most people never realize which one is happening until it's too late. Think of two founders, both brilliant, both convinced their idea would change everything. The first one's ego pushed him to pitch investors who laughed him out of the room again and again until one finally said yes. The second one's ego did the exact same thing, except when his product started failing. That same confidence stopped him from admitting it, stopped him from listening to customers begging for change. One ego built an empire, the other buried it. Same fuel, completely different outcome. Everyone tells you ego is the enemy. Stay humble, they say. Don't let it get to your head. For the most part, that advice isn't wrong. Ego has ended careers, ruined relationships, and convinced brilliant people they no longer needed to listen to anyone. But here's what almost nobody tells you. The same force that destroys weak men is exactly what builds powerful ones. The difference was never whether you have an ego. Everyone does. The difference is whether you control it or it controls you. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. If you kill your ego completely, you don't become wise, you become invisible. You stop taking risks. You stop asserting what you deserve. You start shrinking every time someone pushes back because you have nothing left defending your own worth. The world doesn't reward the person with no ego. It rewards the person whose ego is strong enough to take a hit and smart enough to know when to stay quiet. That's exactly what we're breaking down today. Not how to destroy your ego, and not how to feed it recklessly either, but how to master it, so it becomes the weapon that builds you instead of the flaw that eventually breaks you. Because the people who seem truly unstoppable were never the ones without an ego. They were the ones who finally learned how to use it. Picture a boardroom meeting. Someone presents an idea, and it gets torn apart, piece by piece, in front of everyone. One person in that room turns red, gets defensive, starts arguing every point just to save face. Another person in that same room, hearing the exact same criticism, nods, takes notes, and comes back next week with something twice as strong. Same insult to the ego. Two completely different reactions. And years later, only one of them is still in that room. This is where ego quietly decides careers, relationships, and reputations, long before talent or intelligence ever gets the chance to matter. Look at athletes who dominate their sport for a decade versus the ones who flame out after one great season. The ones who last almost always share one trait: an ego strong enough to demand excellence from themselves, but flexible enough to absorb a loss without collapsing. The ones who flame out usually share the opposite: an ego so fragile that one bad game, one public failure, becomes something they can never recover from, because their entire identity was built on being untouchable. The same pattern shows up in relationships. The partner who can hear "you hurt me" without turning it into a war, without needing to win the conversation, is the one people stay with for decades. The partner who treats every disagreement like a personal attack on their character is usually the one left wondering, again, why nobody stays. Here's the psychology behind it. A healthy ego acts like a shock absorber. It lets criticism, failure, and rejection hit you without shattering your sense of self. A fragile ego acts like glass. It looks fine until the first real impact, and then it doesn't just crack, it breaks completely. And the person spends more energy defending the crack than actually fixing what caused it. This is exactly why some people seem to recover from failure faster than others recover from a bad mood. It was never about how tough the situation was. It was about how much of their identity was riding on never being wrong in the first place. Here's a rule. Almost nobody teaches you about ego, and it's the one that separates people who use it well from people it eventually destroys. Your ego should be loud in your actions, and silent in your explanations. The moment you feel the need to constantly tell people how good you are, how right you were, how much you deserve, you've already lost the thing you're trying to prove. Real confidence doesn't announce itself. It just shows up, does the work, and lets the results speak while it stays quiet. Watch what happens to people who can't follow this rule. They interrupt to remind you of their achievements. They can't let a mistake go unexplained, even when nobody asked. They need the last word in every disagreement, not because they're usually right, but because being seen as right has become more important than actually being right. This isn't strength. It's a person managing a wound they never dealt with, using volume instead of value. Here's the brutal truth underneath all of this. Most ego-driven collapses were never really about the failure itself. They were about a person's inability to separate what happened to them from who they are. A failed project becomes, I am a failure. A rejected idea becomes, I am not good enough. And once your identity is fused that tightly to outcomes you can't fully control, every setback stops being information and starts being a personal execution. The people who seem unshakable were never immune to failure. They simply built an identity sturdy enough to survive it. When their idea gets rejected, they don't hear, you are worthless. They hear, this particular idea didn't work. Try again. That single shift, separating the outcome from the identity, is the entire difference between an ego that breaks under pressure and one that gets sharper because of it. This is the part of ego nobody wants to admit publicly, because it requires looking honestly at every time you defended something you should have just let go of, every argument you won that actually cost you more than losing it ever would have. Take a moment and think honestly about the last time you couldn't let something go. A comment that stung more than it should have. An argument you kept replaying, rewriting your comeback hours after it ended. A mistake you still haven't forgiven yourself for, even though everyone else moved on weeks ago. That's not weakness. That's your ego, unguarded, trying to protect a version of you that felt threatened. The exhausting part isn't the criticism itself. It's the hours spent defending against it long after the moment has passed. Here's what nobody tells you about that exhaustion. It's not a personality flaw you're stuck with. It's a skill you never learned, and skills can be built. So let's break down exactly how. First, separate the event from your identity every single time on purpose. When something goes wrong, say the sentence out loud if you have to. This happened. It doesn't define me. It sounds simple, almost too simple. But the brain believes what you repeat, especially under pressure. Second, let your work speak before your words do. The next time you want to defend yourself, explain yourself, or prove a point, wait. Let your results answer instead. 9 times out of 10, the version of you that stays quiet and simply delivers ends up looking stronger than the version that argued to be believed. This isn't about becoming numb or pretending failure doesn't sting. It still will. But there's a difference between feeling a hit and being destroyed by it. The people who look unbothered were never actually unbothered. They just stopped confusing a bad moment with a bad identity. And that one shift changed everything about how much power criticism had over them. Here's the twist most people never see coming once they actually master this. The less you need people to see you as impressive, the more impressive you actually start to look. It's almost backwards. The moment you stop performing confidence, stop defending every opinion, stop needing the last word, people around you start reading that stillness as strength. Because in a world full of people desperately trying to prove something, the person who doesn't need to prove anything immediately stands out. This is the part Machiavelli, Robert Greene, and every serious student of power eventually arrive at. Ego was never meant to be destroyed. It was meant to be redirected, pointed inward instead of outward, used to hold yourself to a standard instead of use to convince everyone else you've already met one. The people who seem truly unshakable didn't get there by having less ego than everyone else. They got there by finally aiming it at the right target, themselves, instead of every person who happened to disagree with them. So here's what this actually looks like in practice. Let your ambition stay loud. Let your excellence stay loud. But let your reactions, your explanations, your need to be seen as right, go quiet. That single shift is the difference between an ego that builds an empire over decades and an ego that burns bright for one impressive year before it collapses under its own weight. Think back to those two founders from the beginning. Both had the exact same fuel. Both had the exact same fire. The only difference was direction. One pointed his ego at the work, and the other pointed his at his own reflection. That's the whole lesson, hidden inside one uncomfortable truth. Your ego isn't the enemy you've been told it is. If this video shifted how you see your own ego, make sure to like it and subscribe, because next time on Sam Knows, we're uncovering another uncomfortable truth about human nature that most people spend their whole lives avoiding.